All right, so today we're diving into the world of Miguel de Cervantes, the man behind the masterpiece Don Quixote. You know, it's amazing. This book is considered one of the greatest ever written, but we hardly ever hear about Cervantes himself. It's kind of strange when you think about it. And what makes this deep dive even more interesting is that we're working with a classic translation, starting right at the beginning with the translator's preface. It's like we're getting a peek behind the curtain of literary history.
It really is remarkable, that the translator points out that it took 4 generations after Don Quixote was published, 4 generations before anyone even thought about researching Cervantes' life.
Wow, imagine that. A literary giant, almost forgotten by history.
Mm-hmm.
It's mind-boggling. Thankfully, we have this preface and, of course, Don Quixote itself. And, what I find really intriguing is how the preface reveals all these fascinating details about Cervantes' own life. Things like his military service, the serious injury he got at the Battle of Lepanto, even his time as a captive in Algiers. It's almost like he lived through some of the adventures we see in Don Quixote.
Yeah, it's true. His personal experiences are really woven into his writing. I mean, take his captivity, for example. That experience must have had such a profound impact on how he saw freedom, illusion, even the very nature of reality, all these themes that are so central to Don Quixote.
It makes you wonder how those experiences shaped the way he saw the world, and how that perspective comes through in the book. But before we delve too deep into those themes, there's something else the preface mentions that struck me. It's about Cervantes' own relationship with Don Quixote. And it seems pretty complex.
Oh, absolutely. It is curious, isn't it? He seems way more concerned with entertaining his audience than getting any kind of literary recognition. There is even this anecdote about him. Apparently, he was more interested in the success of a play by Lope de Vega than the impact of his own masterpiece.
That's incredible. It's like he had no idea about the enduring legacy Don Quixote would have.
And yet, even with that apparent indifference to critical acclaim, Don Quixote is still a meticulously crafted work. It's got layers, a story within a story, with this fascinating interplay of authorship, translation, cultural context.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. And then there's Cervantes' humor, which deserves its own conversation entirely. The preface describes it as Cervantes' serious air, which at first sounds kind of contradictory. But then when you actually read Don Quixote, it clicks.
Yeah, it's a very specific type of humor. It's not like in your face or anything. It's subtle. It's built on letting the absurdity of the situations speak for themselves. Cervantes isn't trying to force it or wink at the audience. He trusts their intelligence to get the humor organically.
And probably the best example of that is Sancho Panza. We laugh at the things he says, the things he does, not because Cervantes is telling us to, but because they're just inherently funny within the world of the story. But Don Quixote is so much more than just laughs. It's overflowing with themes that are still relevant today, like illusion versus reality, idealism versus pragmatism.
Right, those timeless themes. They're what elevate Don Quixote from just a humorous story to a really profound exploration of what it means to be human.
Absolutely. So let's dive into those themes a bit more. The one that always jumps out at me is the constant clash between illusion and reality, especially with Don Quixote. I mean, he sees inns and thinks they're castles, windmills become giants. His perception of reality is constantly at odds with what's right in front of him.
And that's something we all grapple with. Even today, we tell ourselves stories, cling to certain beliefs. We often see the world not as it is, but as we want it to be. And Don Quixote holds up a mirror to that very human tendency. It makes us question our own perceptions.
Right. And that's what makes it so thought-provoking. It's not just a lighthearted adventure story, though it is also very funny. It really pushes you to confront your own relationship with reality. And then there's the whole dynamic between Don Quixote and Sancho Panza.
Yeah.
They embody idealism and pragmatism, respectively.
Oh, their relationship is such a brilliant study in contrasts. You have Don Quixote, driven by this sense of chivalry and romance, charging into every situation head first. And then there's Sancho, rooted in practicality, providing this grounding counterpoint. It's through their interactions that Cervantes really explores these contrasting approaches to life.
It's such a recognizable human dynamic, too. I mean, we've all had those moments where we're tempted to just go for it, follow our ideals without question. And then there are those times when pragmatism takes over.
Absolutely. And, what's so compelling about Don Quixote is that it doesn't judge either approach. It presents both idealism and pragmatism in all their complexities, and it lets us, the readers, come to our own conclusions.
Right, right. And speaking of complexities, I think it's high time we dove into some specific moments from Don Quixote. Those scenes that really exemplify these themes, those unforgettable moments that capture Cervantes' brilliance. Where should we even begin?
Well, you mentioned earlier how Cervantes blends humor with these more serious themes, and I think the episode with the goat herds is a great example of that.
Ah, you mean the one with the tale of Marcella and Chrysostom. It starts off as this lighthearted interlude, almost like a story within a story. But then it takes this incredibly tragic turn, this whole story of unrequited love.
Exactly. And it's all seen through the lens of Don Quixote's chivalrous delusions. He's so busy trying to impose his romantic ideals on the situation that he completely misses the genuine pain and heartbreak unfolding right in front of him.
It's a powerful reminder that blind idealism, as noble as it might seem, can blind us to the complexities of human emotion. Okay, what about the balsam of Fierabras? That scene always cracks me up.
Oh, yes, poor Sancho and his injuries. And of course, Don Quixote with his completely misguided attempts at healing. It's classic Cervantes, using humor to make a deeper point.
It's like he's saying even in the most ridiculous situations, there's some underlying truth to be found. But Cervantes doesn't shy away from the tougher issues either, like the freeing of the galley slaves. That part has always stuck with me.
It really highlights Cervantes' skill in creating these morally ambiguous scenarios. He presents the situation where we initially sympathize with these prisoners, and then we find out that some of them might actually be guilty of serious crimes. It makes us question our own ideas about justice, freedom, the whole structure of society.
That's like he's asking, what does freedom really mean, and what are we willing to sacrifice for it? It's such a gray area, morally speaking, and it still sparks debate centuries later.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Absolutely. And speaking of moral gray areas, we can't forget about the Night of the Mirrors. That whole sequence is like being trapped in a hall of mirrors. It constantly plays with our perceptions of identity, illusion, reality.
I was hoping we'd get to him. The mystery surrounding his character is so well crafted. Is he a figment of Don Quixote's imagination? A rival knight trying to expose him? Cervantes keeps us guessing until the very end.
It's just brilliant how he keeps us on the edge of our seats. Like, we're constantly trying to figure out what's real and what's just Don Quixote's imagination running wild. And that whole question of reality versus illusion, like we were talking about, it's woven into the very fabric of the book.
It really is. It's like Cervantes is holding up this mirror, not just to the characters, but to us, the readers, too, making us confront our own assumptions and biases about the world. And I think that's exactly why Don Quixote still resonates so strongly after all these centuries. It's not just a funny story about a knight-errant. It's a profound exploration of what it means to be human.
Exactly. And it's amazing how Cervantes manages to achieve that depth while still keeping us entertained. Like, the book is thought-provoking, it's laugh-out-loud funny at times, but it never loses sight of those bigger philosophical ideas. It's a tough balance to strike, but he does it masterfully.
You mentioned earlier that Cervantes wasn't really seeking literary acclaim with Don Quixote, but with a book this well-crafted, this insightful, it's hard to imagine he didn't have some sense of its potential. Even the translator's preface kind of touches on that.
You're right. There's that part where Cervantes talks about how taking down all those chivalry romances, it wasn't the work closest to his heart.
Interesting. So if Don Quixote wasn't his passion project, what was?
Well, he mentions wanting to write plays, dramas, comedies, that kind of thing, works that would both entertain and teach the audience. It seems like he really wanted that direct connection with an audience that you get with theater.
I see. It's fascinating to imagine what those lost plays might have been like. But even if Don Quixote wasn't his main focus, you can tell he poured his heart and soul into it. The level of detail, the way he develops his characters, his wit, it's undeniable.
Absolutely. Every single page is a testament to his talent. He was at the top of his game, even if he didn't fully realize the magnitude of what he was creating at the time.
Talk about stumbling into literary immortality, right? But let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the structural elements that contribute to the book's lasting appeal. Don Quixote is not a short book. It's 2 parts. So how does he keep readers engaged over such a long, sprawling narrative?
One word: Sancho Panza. He's the perfect counterbalance to Don Quixote. Grounding the story with humor and a kind of down-to-earth wisdom, he's like the voice of the everyday person, reminding us that even in the middle of all these grand adventures, life, with all its ordinary realities, goes on.
And he's usually the one left dealing with the consequences of Don Quixote's crazy schemes. But he's also incredibly loyal to his master. And in a way, he's an idealist, too. Just more grounded in reality.
Exactly. He believes in Don Quixote even when everyone else thinks he's completely lost it. Their relationship is such a great example of friendship, a bond that goes beyond all their differences.
It's a good reminder that sometimes the most unexpected friendships are the strongest. But Cervantes doesn't just rely on his characters to drive the story forward. He's also a master of pacing. The way he weaves together all these episodic adventures, it keeps us hooked. Each episode feels both unique and connected to the overall tapestry of the story.
And it's important to remember that those seemingly random episodes, they're not just there for entertainment value. They're deliberately crafted to highlight specific themes or to reveal something new about the characters.
Like that encounter with the goat herds, which leads to the whole tragic tale of Marcella and Chrysostom. Or the hilarious episode with the Balsam of Fierabros. Each one is like a miniature version of the bigger themes at play in the book.
Exactly. It's that skillful layering, that interplay between the specific and the universal, that gives Don Quixote its enduring power. It's a book that manages to be both a product of its time and completely timeless, speaking to the anxieties and aspirations of readers across generations.
It's like we're all on our own quests in a way, trying to make sense of life, trying to balance our ideals with the often harsh realities of the world. And Don Quixote is like this guide. It makes us laugh, makes us think, and ultimately reminds us that we're not alone in this journey.
And isn't that the mark of truly great literature? To be able to transcend time and place, to tap into something fundamental about the human experience that resonates across centuries.
It makes me want to pick up the book and start reading all over again. But before we do that, I want to hear about some of the specific moments from the source material that really stood out to you. What were some of the most memorable scenes or passages for you?
Well, you already mentioned the freeing of the galley slaves. That's such a powerful and unforgettable sequence. But I was also really struck by the encounter with the Knight of the Mirrors. It's this fascinating exploration of identity, self-deception, the very nature of reality.
Oh, absolutely. The way he plays on Don Quixote's delusions, feeding into his fantasies while simultaneously challenging them, it's pure genius. But it also raises some uncomfortable questions about the role of illusion in our lives. Like, is it always a bad thing to believe in something, even if that belief isn't completely grounded in reality?
That's the big question that lingers beneath the surface of Don Quixote, isn't it? And I don't think there's an easy answer. On the one hand, Don Quixote's delusions get him into all sorts of trouble. He gets hurt, humiliated, even imprisoned because of his skewed perception of reality. It's hard not to see that as a warning about the dangers of letting our imaginations run wild.
Yeah, he's kind of a walking disaster zone sometimes. But then again, there's something undeniably admirable about his unwavering idealism, his belief in chivalry and romance, in a world that often seems to have forgotten about those things.
Exactly. And it's that push and pull, that tension between Don Quixote's idealistic worldview and the often harsh realities he encounters. That's what makes the book so captivating.
And it's not just Don Quixote who embodies that tension. Even Sancho Panza, in his own pragmatic way, is an idealist. He believes in his master. He believes in the possibility of a better world, even if he expresses that belief through a more grounded, practical lens.
Absolutely. They represent these two sides of the human experience, the dreamer and the realist.
And it's that duality, that recognition of the complexities within us all, that makes Don Quixote such a timeless masterpiece.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, there's one more scene I have to mention. The episode with Cardenio, the heartbroken shepherd. That one really tugs at the heartstrings. It really is heartbreaking. Cardenio's story is like this classic tale of love and betrayal. But Cervantes takes it beyond that. He weaves Cardenio's heartbreak into the bigger story. And it adds this whole other layer to the themes of love, illusion, even fate.
Right. And it shows off another one of Cervantes' strengths. How good he is at creating these characters that feel so real, so relatable, even when they're caught up in these crazy situations.
Yeah, even the secondary characters like Cardenio and Marcella,
Yeah.
they're not just there to move the plot along. They have their own stories, their own reasons for doing things, their own struggles. It makes the world of Don Quixote feel so much richer and more alive.
Absolutely. Take Marcella, for instance. She's fascinating. So independent, strong-willed, determined to live life on her own terms. She refuses to be tied down by what society expects of her as a woman.
She was definitely ahead of her time. I can see how her character might have ruffled some feathers back then. Some people probably judged her for rejecting Chrysostom, for choosing freedom over love and marriage.
And that's what's so great about how Cervantes portrays her. He doesn't make her out to be a villain. He doesn't judge her choices. He just tells her story, her perspective, and lets us, the readers, decide what we think.
Right. There's another example of how Don Quixote really makes you think critically. challenging those assumptions we all have, and reminding us that there are always multiple sides to every story.
Exactly. And it proves how a book written centuries ago can still feel relevant today. We see characters like Marcella dealing with issues of freedom, identity, societal expectations, things that are still so important today.
It's like Cervantes is saying, hey, there's no one right way to live.
Yeah.
Embrace what makes you unique, even the contradictions. That's what makes you human.
And that's a message that's just as powerful now as it was back then. We're all still trying to figure out who we are, what our purpose is, trying to find meaning in a world that often feels overwhelming and uncertain.
Which brings us right back to that core theme of illusion versus reality. I mean, Don Quixote is full of illusions, both literal and metaphorical. But is Cervantes condemning those illusions, or is there something more to it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, I think it's up to each reader to decide. There's no single right answer.
Because on the one hand, Don Quixote's delusions constantly get him into trouble. He faces danger, humiliation, even imprisonment because he doesn't see reality for what it is. It's hard not to see that as a cautionary tale about letting your imagination run wild.
True, but at the same time, there's something so captivating about his idealism, his belief in chivalry and romance in a world that often seems to have abandoned those things.
It's like it represents that part in all of us, the part that wants to believe in magic, in the impossible.
Exactly. And it's that tension, that push and pull between the allure of illusion and the harsh realities of life. That's what makes Don Quixote so enduring, so powerful.
It reminds us that we need both, I think. Dreams, ideals to inspire us, and a dose of reality to keep us grounded.
It's a balancing act, isn't it? That constant dance between who we want to be and who we are, between the world as we wish it was and the world as it is. That's what it means to be human.
It makes you wonder about Cervantes himself. Was he more of a Don Quixote or a Sancho Panza at heart? A dreamer or a realist?
That's a question we might never be able to answer definitively, but I think it's safe to say he was a keen observer of human nature. He understood the complexities and contradictions that make us who we are.
And that understanding, that empathy for his characters, it shines through on every page of Don Quixote. He's not judging them or condemning them. He's presenting them to us, flaws and all, and letting us draw our own conclusions.
And that's the mark of a true masterpiece, wouldn't you say? A work that keeps people talking, challenging assumptions, resonating with readers centuries later.
Absolutely. Well, it seems we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of Miguel de Cervantes and his incredible creation, Don Quixote.
A book full of humor, wisdom, and timeless insights into the human experience.
We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, maybe even inspired you to pick up Don Quixote for yourself, or revisit it with a fresh perspective.
As always, keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep seeking out new perspectives.
Until next time, happy reading.